That baby ain't mine. The words cut through the cheerful noise of the Founders' Day festival like a shard of glass. They were cold, loud, and brutally final. The happy chatter of the crowd in Harmony Creek's town square died instantly. The cheerful music from the carousel seemed to stutter and fade. Every eye turned, drawn to the source of the sudden ugly drama. Liam Bradshaw stood at the bottom of the stage steps, his face a mask of fury. Just moments before, he had been the town's golden boy, smiling under the warm September sun, his arm wrapped around his beautiful fiancée, Amelia. He was the man who was going to build the new community library, the man whose family name was carved into the town's history like the names on the war memorial. Now, that perfect image was shattering. "Do you really think I'd be that stupid?" he snarled, his voice low but carrying in the sudden thick silence. He took a step closer to the young woman standing before him, a woman who looked as fragile as a dandelion in a storm. "To fall for a trick like this? From you?" Elara Vance stood motionless, her arms wrapped protectively around the small bundle in her arms. The baby, Lily, stirred at the sound of his harsh voice, a tiny whimper escaping her lips. Elara's hands, though trembling, held her daughter with a fierce tenderness. Her eyes, the color of a soft summer sky, were wide with a mix of shock and pain. She hadn't expected him to welcome her with open arms, but she had never imagined this public cruelty. This was a nightmare unfolding in broad daylight. She had come here today to be quiet, to be discreet. She had only wanted a private word, a chance for him to see, to understand. But he had turned it into a public execution. "Liam, please." Elara's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the growing murmur of the crowd. "Just look at her. Just for a second." "I'm looking," he snapped, his gaze flicking to the baby with disgust before turning back to her. "She looks like any other baby." "What's your game, Elara? Are you out of money already? Did you think you could show up here and pin your mistake on me? In front of the whole town?" The whispers in the crowd grew louder, turning from curious to judgmental. "I knew she was trouble the day she moved here. She's an artist, you know. They're all the same." Poor Liam and his fiancée, Amelia, standing right there. How humiliating. The words were like tiny, sharp stones hitting Elara from every direction. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. She was the outsider, the newcomer who had only lived in Harmony Creek for a little over a year. He was their hero, their legacy. She saw in their faces that they had already chosen their side. The war was over before it even began. Her body curled slightly forward, sheltering Lily from the hateful stares. She pressed her lips together so tightly they turned white, fighting back the tears that burned behind her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Liam glanced back up at the stage, where his fiancée, Amelia, stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Her face was pale with shock. Seeing her seemed to fuel his anger. He turned back to Elara, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You are trying to ruin my life. My family's name. My future. For what? A handout?" He leaned in closer, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. "You are trash. I gave you a little attention and this is how you repay me? You think a few nights of fun gives you a claim on me? You are not just a liar, you are delusional." Elara flinched as if he had physically struck her. She held her baby tighter, her knuckles turning white. She finally found her voice, though it was hoarse with unshed tears and fatigue. "She has your mark, Liam," he scoffed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "My mark? What are you even talking about?" "You're crazy." "The star," Elara whispered, her fingers gently pulling back the soft, knitted cuff of her baby's sleeve. A tiny, perfect star-shaped birthmark, the color of a faint strawberry, was visible on the baby's delicate wrist. "It's on her wrist. The same one you have. The one your father has." For a single breathtaking second, Liam's eyes darted down to the baby's arm. The world went silent in that half-second. Time froze. Elara watched him, watched the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the tiny crack forming in his towering wall of denial. She saw it, he saw it. His heart skipped just once, a hiccup of hesitation in a man who prided himself on absolute control. But then he blinked. He shook his head, a quick, violent motion, and looked away. "Nah," he muttered, his voice rough. "A coincidence. A smudge of dirt. Means nothing." He took a step back, creating a chasm between them. He raised his voice again for the whole town to hear, to be his witness. I came here today to celebrate this town, not to be ambushed by a desperate woman. This pathetic attempt to trap me is over. Now get out of here, and don't you ever come near me or my family again. He turned his back on her, a final brutal dismissal. He walked back toward the stage, not looking back, as the crowd parted for him like he was a king. Elara stood alone in the silence he left behind. The whispers had stopped. Now there was only the cold, heavy weight of judgment. She looked down at her daughter's face, at the innocent, trusting eyes staring up at her. She bent down and kissed Lily's forehead, her own quiet tears finally streaking down her face. Not loud, dramatic sobs. These were different. Quiet, heavy, tired tears, the kind you cry when the fight is over, and you have lost everything. She turned and walked away from the town square, away from the pointing fingers and the cold stares. She didn't run. Her back was straight. Her head was held high. With every step she could feel the invisible walls of the town closing in around her. The war had just happened, but she knew that for her and her daughter, survival had just begun. 1 year earlier, the town of Harmony Creek had seemed like a promise. Elara had arrived in late autumn, when the maple trees lining Main Street were ablaze with fiery shades of red and gold. She had come from the noisy, anonymous gray of the city, seeking a place where the sky was big and the silence was deep. She was an artist, a painter of landscapes, and the rolling hills and winding rivers of the valley felt like a masterpiece waiting to be captured on canvas. She rented a small cottage at the edge of town, a forgotten little place with a crooked porch and a garden choked with weeds. But it had a large window with perfect northern light, and the rent was cheap. It was all she needed. She spent her days hiking through the woods, her sketchbook in hand and her evenings painting, the scent of turpentine and oil paints filling her small home. She was quiet. She kept to herself, and the town mostly left her alone. They saw her as a curiosity, the city artist with paint stains on her jeans and a dreamy look in her eyes. She sold a few paintings at the local farmer's market and took on small design jobs to make ends meet, like painting signs for the local bakery or designing flyers for the town's seasonal festivals. It was during the preparations for the winter gala that she met Bradshaw. He was the head of the organizing committee, the energetic, charismatic heir to the Bradshaw fortune. His family had practically built Harmony Creek. They owned the old lumber mill, most of the commercial buildings on Main Street, and acres of the surrounding land. Liam was handsome, confident, and carried himself with an easy charm that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He was the town's unofficial prince. He had commissioned her to paint a large winter scene to be auctioned off at the gala for charity. He'd come to her cottage to discuss the project, stepping into her cluttered, paint-splattered world with an amused smile. "So, this is where the magic happens," he'd said, his eyes sweeping over the canvases leaning against the walls. He wasn't condescending, just genuinely curious. "It's not magic," she'd replied softly, wiping her hands on a rag. "It's just work." He was different from the men she had known in the city. He listened. He asked her about her art, about the meaning behind the colors she chose, about the feeling she tried to capture in the light of a sunset. He stayed for over an hour that first day, talking about his own dreams for Harmony Creek, the new library, a park for the children, a way to bring new life to the old town without losing its soul. He started visiting her cottage regularly after that, under the pretense of checking on the painting's progress. But soon the pretense fell away. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about the immense pressure he felt to live up to his family's name, the loneliness of being seen as a symbol rather than a person. "People in this town don't see me," he confessed one snowy evening, staring out her window at the falling flakes. "They see my last name. They see dollar signs. They see a future mayor. They don't see the guy who just wants to go fishing and not talk about town business for a day." In those moments, Elara saw past the golden boy exterior. She saw a man who was lonely, who was searching for something real, and in her he seemed to find a safe harbor. She didn't want anything from him. She wasn't impressed by his money or his name. She was interested in the man who quoted poetry and knew the names of all the constellations. One night, a week before the gala, a heavy snowstorm blanketed the town. The power went out. Elara was sitting by her fireplace wrapped in a blanket when a knock came at her door. It was Liam, covered in snow, his cheeks red from the cold. "My car got stuck down the road," he said, shaking the snow from his coat. "And my phone's dead. I was hoping I could wait out the storm here." She let him in without hesitation. They sat by the fire, sharing a pot of tea and talking in low voices as the storm raged outside. The world was reduced to the warm, flickering light of the fire in her small, quiet cottage. "You're different, Elara," he murmured, his voice soft. "You don't look at me with expectations. It's peaceful." He reached out and gently touched a stray curl of her hair, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "It's lonely at the top," he had whispered. "People only love you when you're winning." His breath smelled of the cold night air and something else, something sad and vulnerable. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a demanding kiss, but a searching one, full of a loneliness that matched her own. And Elara, caught in the magic of the snowstorm, in the warmth of the fire, in the shared intimacy of that quiet, dark room, didn't pull away. Later, lying alone in her bed, listening to the sound of his steady breathing from the couch where he slept, she stared at the ceiling, her heart beating a wild, uncertain rhythm. She felt a connection to him that was deeper than she had ever felt with anyone. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world was bright, white, and silent. He left before the town was fully awake, with a soft kiss on her forehead and a whispered promise. "I'll call you later," but he never did. The next day, he sent a courier to pick up the finished painting for the gala. There was a check inside the envelope for double the amount they had agreed upon. But there was no note, no call, nothing. At the gala, she saw him from across the crowded room. He was standing with Amelia Croft, the beautiful daughter of another prominent family, his arm possessively around her waist. He looked right at Elara, his eyes holding hers for a fraction of a second. But there was no recognition in his gaze, no warmth. It was the look a stranger gives you, cold, polite, and distant. He turned back to Amelia, laughing at something she said, and Elara felt her heart crack. She had been a secret, a temporary escape, a story that was already over. Weeks later, when the 2 pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test, she felt the world tilt on its axis. She gathered every ounce of her courage and went to his office at the Bradshaw building on Main Street. She remembered standing in the doorway, the positive test clutched in her hand. He barely looked up from his paperwork. "What do you want, Elara?" "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice shaking. He paused just for a second, then went back to signing a document. He laughed under his breath, a cold, dismissive sound. "You're joking?" "I'm not," she insisted. "It's yours. I haven't been with anyone else." He finally looked at her then, his eyes hard as stone. "You seriously think you can pin this on me?" That night was a mistake, a stupid mistake in a snowstorm. It meant nothing. He pulled out his checkbook, his movements sharp and angry. "Here," he said, scribbling a number and tearing it out. "This is for your trouble. Get rid of it, and don't ever come back here. Consider this a final payment for the painting." It was a check for $10,000. He had slid it across the desk as if he were settling a bill. No arguments, no hesitation. Just a check and a dismissal. She had left the check on his desk, turned and walked out without another word. And now, 9 months later, standing in the town square with his child in her arms, he was still treating her like a bill he refused to pay. He hadn't changed at all. He had just gotten crueler. The walk back to her cottage felt impossibly long. Every step was heavy, as if she were wading through a thick, invisible mud of shame and sorrow. The cheerful sounds of the festival faded behind her, replaced by the ringing silence in her own ears. She didn't look at anyone she passed on the street, but she could feel their eyes on her back, their whispers following her like a cold shadow. Her small cottage, once a peaceful refuge, now felt like a cage. She closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing the finality of what had just happened. For a long moment, she simply stood in the entryway, her body trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Lily, sensing her mother's distress, began to cry, a thin wailing sound that pierced Elara's bubble of shock. "Oh, my sweet girl," Elara whispered, her voice cracking. She sank into the old rocking chair by the window, cradling Lily against her chest and rocking back and forth in a slow, desperate rhythm. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I put you through that." She wasn't just apologizing for the scene at the festival. She was apologizing for everything. For bringing her into a world where her own father could look at her and see nothing. For choosing a man who was a coward. A man who valued his reputation more than his own child. The tears she had held back in the town square now fell freely, soaking the soft blanket wrapped around her daughter. Her mind replayed the scene over and over. The look of disgust on Liam's face. The hateful whispers of the crowd. The chilling moment he denied the star-shaped birthmark on his daughter's wrist. He hadn't just denied it. He had dismissed it as a smudge of dirt. The cruelty of that lie was a fresh wound. That birthmark wasn't a coincidence. It was a legacy. A tiny, perfect star that had been passed down through the Bradshaw men for generations. Liam had one on his own wrist, often hidden by the cuff of an expensive shirt. She had traced it with her finger that night by the fire, and he had told her, "My dad has one, and his dad before him. The Bradshaw star, he calls it." He knew. As surely as he knew his own name, he knew that Mark meant Lily was his. And he had lied. He had lied to the whole town, to his fiancée, and to himself. The depth of his denial was terrifying. Hours passed. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting long shadows across the floor. Lily finally cried herself to sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that stood in stark contrast to the storm raging inside Elara. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to hide from the world. But the knock came again, gentle but persistent. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she walked to the door and opened it a crack. It was Mrs. Gable, her elderly neighbor from down the road. She was a woman of few words, with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple, and eyes that had seen nearly a century of life in Harmony Creek. She stood on the porch holding a covered casserole dish, the steam rising from it carrying the comforting scent of baked macaroni and cheese. "Heard there was some trouble in town," Mrs. Gable said, her voice raspy but kind. She didn't wait for an answer. She simply looked past Elara to the sleeping baby in the rocking chair. "That man is a fool. Always has been." His father was the same. All pride and no backbone. Elara stared at her, speechless. She had expected judgment, or at least pity. She had not expected this quiet, unwavering support. Mrs. Gable pushed the warm dish into Elara's hands. "You need to eat. A mother's got to keep her strength up. The world doesn't stop spinning just because one man acts like a coward." She looked at Elara, her gaze sharp and clear. "Don't you let them break you, girl. This town is full of gossips who have nothing better to do than tear people down. But there's good folk here, too. You just have to know where to look." With that, she gave a small, firm nod and turned, walking back down the path as slowly and deliberately as she had come. The simple act of kindness was like a balm on Elara's raw nerves. It didn't fix anything, but it was a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. She carried the casserole dish into the kitchen and sat at her small wooden table, staring at it. She wasn't hungry, but she made herself eat, just as Mrs. Gable had instructed. She needed her strength. Later that evening, as darkness fell over the valley, Elara sat by the window, watching the first stars appear in the deep blue sky. She thought about Liam's check, the $10,000 he had tried to give her to erase his mistake. She had left it on his desk, but she remembered the way he had written it, with a swift, angry flourish, as if her entire existence could be reduced to a transaction. Now he was building a library, a grand gesture to secure his family's legacy. He was a pillar of the community, engaged to the perfect woman from the perfect family. He was building a perfect life on a foundation of lies. And what did she have? A tiny cottage, a few $100s in her bank account, and a daughter who carried the mark of a man who refused to claim her. She looked down at Lily, who was stirring in her bassinet. She reached down and touched the baby's tiny hand, her finger tracing the outline of the star on her wrist. A new feeling began to bubble up inside her, pushing past the grief and the shame. It was anger, a cold, hard anger that gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. "He called you a mistake," she whispered into the quiet room. "He called you a lie. But you're not. You are the truth. You are my truth." She pressed a kiss to her daughter's head. He had drawn the battle lines today in front of the entire town. He thought he had won. He thought she would simply disappear, shamed and defeated. But he had underestimated her. He didn't know that a mother fighting for her child was the most formidable force in the world. "He doesn't get to erase you," she whispered fiercely. "I won't let him." Outside, the town of Harmony Creek settled into a quiet, peaceful night. But in the small cottage at the edge of the woods, a quiet war had just been declared. A war for truth, for identity, and for a little girl with a star on her wrist. Across town, in the grand Bradshaw mansion on the hill, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. The house, a sprawling colonial with white pillars and perfectly manicured lawns, was a fortress of strained silence. Liam paced the length of the mahogany-paneled study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The ice cubes clinked nervously, the only sound in the room apart from the frantic beating of his own heart. His father, Richard Bradshaw, sat behind a massive oak desk, his hands steepled in front of him. Richard was a man carved from the same hard wood as his desk, stern, unyielding, and polished to a fine sheen on the surface. His eyes, the same shade of gray as his son's, were narrowed, watching Liam's every move with cold disappointment. "You made a spectacle of yourself." "Liam," Richard said finally, his voice low and controlled, which was always more terrifying than when he yelled. "You turned a day meant to celebrate this family's contributions into a public circus." Liam stopped pacing and slammed his glass down on the desk, the whiskey sloshing over the rim. "What was I supposed to do? Let her stand there and accuse me. Let her ruin everything. I did what I had to do." "I shut it down. You shut it down?" Richard scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't be a fool. You lit a fire. All you did was make people more curious. Denial without proof is just an invitation for gossip. And this town thrives on gossip." Liam ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. "It's not true." "She's lying. She's a desperate, manipulative artist who saw an opportunity." He was trying to convince his father, but the words felt hollow even to his own ears. He could still see the star on the baby's wrist, a perfect, damning replica of his own. The image was burned into his mind. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze unblinking. "Is she lying?" He didn't ask it like a question. He asked it like a man who already knew the answer and was testing his son's ability to lie to his face. "Because Frank Gable's wife was at the market this afternoon. She said the girl showed everyone the birthmark. The Bradshaw star. She said it was as clear as day." Liam's blood ran cold. Of course, Mrs. Gable would be the one to see it, to remember. She had been his grandmother's closest friend. She knew the family history, the family secrets better than anyone. "It's a coincidence," Liam insisted, his voice sounding weak and thin. "It has to be." His father said nothing for a long moment, simply studying him. Then he sighed, a sound of deep, weary frustration. "Whether it is or it isn't, the damage is done. Amelia's family has been calling all afternoon. Her father is furious. He's talking about calling off the engagement, re-evaluating our business partnership. Your little mess in the town square today could cost this family millions." The weight of his father's words crushed Liam. This wasn't just about his personal life anymore. It was about the family empire, the legacy he had been groomed his entire life to protect. "I'll fix it," Liam said desperately. "I'll talk to Amelia. I'll talk to her father. I'll make this go away." "And how do you plan on doing that?" Richard asked, his voice sharp. "With more public denials?" "You need to handle this quietly. You need to handle her." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Find out what she wants. Money, I assume. They always want money. Give her what she wants, but make her sign a document. A non-disclosure agreement. Make her agree to leave this town and never come back. Erase her. Erase the problem." The cold, calculated nature of his father's plan made Liam's stomach churn. Erase her. Just like he had tried to do with the check 9 months ago. But Elara hadn't taken the money then. She had a quiet strength, a stubborn pride that he knew wouldn't be so easily bought. He remembered her face in the town square, the hurt in her eyes, yes, but also the fierce protective fire as she held her child. She wasn't the same dreamy, soft-spoken artist he had known. Motherhood had forged something new in her, something hard and unyielding. "And what if she won't take the money?" Liam asked, the question hanging in the air. "Then you make her life so uncomfortable that she has no choice but to leave," his father said without a hint of hesitation. "You're a Bradshaw. This town belongs to us. Use that power. People will listen to you. A quiet word to her landlord about raising the rent. Suggestion to the market manager that her little art stall is no longer needed. Small things. Annoyances. Until this town, which she thought was her peaceful little refuge, becomes her prison. Liam stared at his father, a chill creeping up his spine. He saw in his father's eyes a ruthlessness he had always admired from a distance, but had never had to face head-on. This was the man who had crushed business rivals without a second thought. The man who believed weakness was a disease to be eradicated. And right now, in his father's eyes, Liam was weak. "Do you understand me?" Richard demanded. "This is not a request. This is how you will fix the mess you made. For the sake of this family. For the sake of your future." Liam looked away, his gaze falling on an old black-and-white photograph on the wall. It was a picture of his grandfather, a stern-looking man with the same gray eyes holding a baby, his own father. He knew without having to see it, that on his grandfather's wrist and on the wrist of the baby in the photo was the very same star. A mark of legacy, a mark of truth. He felt trapped, cornered by his own lie and his father's expectations. He had built his life around being the perfect son, the perfect leader, the perfect man. But that perfection was a fragile illusion, and a tiny, innocent baby had just smashed it to pieces in front of the entire world. "Yes, Father," he finally muttered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I understand." He left the study and walked out onto the grand veranda overlooking the sleeping town. The festival lights in the distance twinkled like fallen stars. He thought of Elara in her small cottage at the edge of the woods. He had told her she was delusional. He had called her a liar. But as he stood there in the cold night air, he knew, with a sickening certainty that was beginning to take root in his soul, that the only one living in a delusion was him, and the price of that delusion was getting higher by the minute. The days following the festival were a quiet, suffocating ordeal. Harmony Creek, a town that usually prided itself on its neighborly charm, had developed a cold and watchful silence. When Elara walked down Main Street to buy groceries, conversations would stop. People would turn away, pretending to look in shop windows, but she could feel their stares, heavy and judgmental, on her back. The warmth she had once felt in this town had evaporated, replaced by a chilly, unwelcoming mist. She tried to set up her small art stall at the weekly farmers market, just as she had for the past year. It was her primary source of income, the place where tourists and locals alike would buy her small landscape paintings and hand-painted cards. But this time was different. People who used to stop and chat would now hurry past her stall, their eyes averted. The market manager, a man who had always been friendly, approached her with an apologetic but firm expression. "Elara," he began, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "I'm afraid we've had some complaints. Some of the other vendors feel your personal situation is creating a tense atmosphere. They think it's bad for business." Elara stared at him, her heart sinking. "Complaints? What kind of complaints?" "Just that it's awkward," he stammered, unable to meet her gaze. "Look, I think it's best if you take a few weeks off. Let things die down. We just can't have this kind of drama here." She knew it wasn't the vendors. It was Liam. This was his father's plan in action. A quiet, insidious campaign to squeeze her out. She packed up her paintings, her hands trembling with a cold fury. They weren't just trying to shame her. They were trying to starve her out. The next blow came a week later. An official-looking letter arrived from her landlord, Mr. Henderson, a reclusive man who lived in the next county and managed his properties through an agent. The letter was short and to the point. Due to rising property taxes and maintenance costs, her rent was being increased by 50%, effective the 1st of next month. The amount was impossible. She could barely afford the rent as it was. With her income from the market gone, she had no way to pay it. This was not about property taxes. This was an eviction notice disguised in bureaucratic language. Liam's influence was far-reaching, a web of power that covered every corner of this town, and she was caught in it like a fly. Panic began to set in, a cold, tight feeling in her chest. She looked around the small cottage, at the paintings that were her soul, at the rocking chair where she sang her daughter to sleep. This little house was the only home Lily had ever known. The thought of being forced out, of having nowhere to go was terrifying. That afternoon, she bundled Lily into her carrier and walked to the town's small community center. A local legal aid service held a free clinic there once a month. She had to wait for nearly 2 hours in a stuffy room filled with other people whose faces were etched with worry. Finally, she was called in to see a young lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Elara explained her situation, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She told her about the rent increase, the market, and the public confrontation with Liam Bradshaw. Sarah listened patiently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When Elara finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "What you're describing is called retaliatory eviction and economic interference," she said. "It's illegal. The problem is proving it." She tapped her pen on the pad. "Liam Bradshaw's family practically owns this town. His father has judges and town council members in his pocket. To fight them, you need more than a suspicion. You need hard evidence that he is directing these actions against you. Right now, it's just your word against one of the most powerful men in the county. So there's nothing I can do." Elara asked, the hope that had been flickering inside her starting to dim. "I'm not saying that," Sarah said, leaning forward. "I'm saying we need to be smart. First about the baby. If you want to establish paternity, you can file a petition with the court. They can order a DNA test. It's the only way to get undeniable proof." Elara's heart pounded at the thought. A court battle. It sounded daunting, expensive, and public. Another round of humiliation. And what would that do? She asked. "It would legally establish him as the father," Sarah explained. "He would be responsible for child support. It would also give the court a reason to look more closely at your other claims. If a judge sees that he is the father of your child, and that you are suddenly being pushed out of your home, and your job right after you asked him to acknowledge her, it starts to look like a pattern of behavior. It builds a case." Sarah's words were a lifeline. It was a long shot, a David and Goliath fight, but it was a path. It was a way to fight back instead of just absorbing the blows. "I don't have any money for a lawyer," Elara said quietly, the practical reality setting in. Sarah smiled, a small, determined smile. "That's why I'm here. My services are pro bono. I believe in this. And frankly," she added, her eyes flashing with a bit of fire, "I'm tired of seeing the Bradshaws act like they are above the law. It's time someone stood up to them." Elara left the community center with a newfound sense of purpose. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach, but now it was mixed with something else. Resolve. They thought they could break her, that they could make her disappear. They had underestimated her. Back at her cottage, she held Lily close, the baby's warm, solid weight a comforting anchor in the storm. "We're going to fight, my love," she whispered, kissing her daughter's soft hair. "They want to make us invisible, but we're going to make them see the truth. The whole world is going to see it." She looked down at the tiny star on Lily's wrist. It was so small, so delicate, yet it held so much power. It was the mark of her identity, the map of her bloodline. It was a truth that had been denied, but it would not be silenced. Not anymore. The battle for Harmony Creek was no longer about shame or survival. It was about justice. The official legal papers arrived at the Bradshaw mansion a week later. They were delivered by a courier. A crisp manila envelope addressed directly to Liam. He was in the middle of a tense breakfast with his fiancée, Amelia, trying to smooth over the cracks that had appeared in their perfect facade since the festival. Amelia had been quiet and distant, her smiles brittle, her eyes holding a new, wary look. Their conversations were strained, sticking to safe, superficial topics like wedding plans and guest lists, but the enormous, unspoken issue of Elara and the baby sat between them like a ghost at the table. "What is it?" Amelia asked, her voice sharp as Liam tore open the envelope. He scanned the legal jargon, his face draining of color. Petition to establish paternity. Court-ordered deoxyribonucleic acid testing. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had underestimated her. He and his father had assumed their campaign of quiet pressure would be enough. They thought she would crumble, that she would take a check and disappear. They had never imagined she would fight back with lawyers and courts. "It's nothing," he said, quickly folding the papers and shoving them into his pocket. "Just some business matter. But Amelia wasn't a fool. She had seen the look on his face. "It's her, isn't it?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That woman. She's suing you." "It's not a lawsuit," he snapped, his own fear making him defensive. "It's a ridiculous legal maneuver. It means nothing. My lawyers will handle it." "Lawyers?" Amelia's eyes widened with a dawning horror. "Oh, Liam, this is going to be in the papers, isn't it? It's going to be a scandal." She pressed a hand to her forehead, the perfect, polished daughter of Harmony Creek's elite finally showing a crack in her composure. "My father will be apoplectic. Our wedding, our families. What is this going to do to us?" Her concern wasn't for him, or for the baby, or for the truth. It was for appearances, for the smooth, untroubled surface of their lives. In that moment, Liam saw with a painful clarity that he and Amelia were exactly the same. They were both products of a world where reputation was everything, and truth was an inconvenience to be managed. He left the table without another word and went straight to his father's study. Richard was on the phone, but Liam didn't wait. He threw the papers down on the polished oak desk. "She's filed a paternity suit," he said, his voice tight. "She's demanding a DNA test." Richard finished his call with a curt dismissal and picked up the documents, his expression unreadable as he read. When he was done, he set them down with a quiet, deliberate motion. He wasn't angry. He was something far more chilling, coldly analytical. "So the girl has found a backbone," he murmured, more to himself than to Liam, "and a cheap legal aid lawyer. This is an escalation. What do we do?" Liam asked, the panic he had been suppressing starting to rise again. "We can't let it get to a DNA test. If that happens..." He trailed off, unable to voice the consequence. If the test proved he was the father, the lie would be exposed. His denials would make him look not just like a cad, but a malicious liar. His father looked up at him, his gray eyes hard as flint. "There is no if, Liam. It will not get to a test. We are going to shut this down before it ever gets that far." "How?" "We discredit her," Richard said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "We make her look unstable. We paint her as a desperate, obsessed woman with a history of erratic behavior. We make the court question her motives, her credibility. By the time we are done, no judge will take her seriously. The plan was as brutal as it was simple. It was an attack on Elara's character, a campaign to destroy her reputation so thoroughly that her claims would seem like the ravings of a madwoman. I'll have our investigators start digging into her past," Richard continued, already picking up the phone to call his own high-powered legal team. "Every friend, every landlord, every ex-boyfriend she's ever had. We'll find something. Everyone has something to hide." Liam felt a wave of nausea. He thought of Elara in her small, paint-splattered cottage. He remembered her quiet passion for her art, the way she spoke about light and shadow. He remembered her gentleness. The idea of sicking a team of ruthless investigators on her, of picking apart her life to find dirt, felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Father, I don't know," he started, a flicker of his conscience trying to break through. "You don't know." Richard's voice was dangerously soft. He stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of his son. "Let me make this very clear to you. Your moment of weakness in a snowstorm is threatening to unravel 100 years of this family's legacy. It threatens your engagement, our business, and our name in this town. You do not have the luxury of a conscience right now. You have one job: to protect this family. Are you a Bradshaw or are you not?" The question was a gauntlet thrown down. To be a Bradshaw was to be strong, to be ruthless, to win at all costs. To hesitate was to be a disappointment. To fail was unthinkable. Liam looked at his father's unyielding face, and the small, flickering flame of his conscience was extinguished by the cold, powerful wind of his ambition and his fear. He had been raised for this, for power, for legacy. He couldn't throw it all away now. "Yes, Father," he said, his own voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm a Bradshaw." "Good," Richard said, turning back to his desk. "Then start acting like one. Our lawyers will file a motion to dismiss. In the meantime, I want you to go see her." Liam was stunned. "See her? Why?" "To offer her one last chance," his father explained. "A final offer. Make it a generous one. $50,000 more, whatever it takes. But you make it clear that this is her only way out. If she refuses, then we unleash everything we have. You let her know in no uncertain terms. that if she chooses to fight us, we will not just beat her. We will ruin her. The threat was clear. It was a declaration of war. A war where there would be no rules, no mercy. And he, Liam Bradshaw, the golden boy of Harmony Creek, was being sent to deliver the ultimatum. He was no longer just a coward who had denied his child. He was about to become a monster. A storm was gathering on the horizon, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray as Liam's luxury sedan pulled up the gravel path to Elara's cottage. The air was thick and heavy, charged with the same tense energy that was thrumming in his veins. He sat in the car for a long moment, the engine humming quietly, staring at the small, crooked house. A single warm light glowed from the window, a beacon of fragile peace in the encroaching gloom. This was harder than he had imagined. It was one thing to make a cruel, public denial in a moment of panic. It was another to come here, to this place where they had once shared secrets by the fire, and deliver a cold, calculated threat. He felt the weight of his father's expectations pressing down on him, a physical force that made it difficult to breathe. He was a Bradshaw. He had to do this. He got out of the car, a leather briefcase in his hand. Inside was not a check, but a legally binding settlement agreement, drafted by his father's lawyers. It was airtight, ruthless, and designed to erase Elara from his life forever. The first drops of rain began to fall as he knocked on the door. It opened a moment later. Elara stood there, her face pale but her eyes clear and steady. She wasn't surprised to see him. She seemed to have been expecting him. She held Lily in one arm, the baby's head resting sleepily on her shoulder. "What do you want, Liam?" she asked, her voice calm. There was no fear in it, only a weary resolve. "Can I come in?" he asked, his own voice sounding rougher than he intended. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a second, then stepped back, allowing him to enter. The cottage smelled of baby powder and turpentine, a strange combination of domesticity and art. It was a world away from the sterile, polished scent of his own home. He didn't know where to start. The speech his father had coached him on, full of legal threats and cold logic, felt alien and monstrous in this small, warm room. Lily stirred in her mother's arms, her sleepy eyes blinking open. They were his eyes, the same stormy gray, fringed with the same dark lashes. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. For a heart-stopping moment, he forgot why he was there. He just stared, mesmerized by the tiny, perfect face of the child he had so brutally denied. "What do you want?" Elara repeated, her voice pulling him back from the brink. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to remember his purpose. He placed the briefcase on her small wooden table and opened it. "I've come to make you an offer," he said, his voice a low, rehearsed monotone. "A final offer." He slid the document across the table toward her. "This is a settlement. It's generous. It will provide you with enough money to start a new life somewhere else. Far away from here." Elara didn't even glance at the papers. Her eyes were locked on his. "You think money is what this is about? You think you can buy my silence? Buy my daughter's identity? This isn't about buying anything," he lied, the words tasting like poison. "This is about being practical. A court battle will be messy. It will be public. It will be painful for everyone involved, including the child." He hated himself for using his own daughter as a weapon against her mother. "Don't you dare!" Elara's voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "Don't you dare pretend you are doing this for her. You are doing this for yourself, for your father, for your precious family name." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "I gave you a chance, Liam, at the festival. I came to you quietly. All I wanted was for you to look at your daughter, to acknowledge her, but you chose to humiliate me. You chose to lie." The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the roof of the cottage. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. "This is your last chance, Elara," he said, forcing the harshness back into his voice. "Sign the papers. Take the money and go. If you don't, I promise you, we will fight you with everything we have. We will drag your name through the mud. We will dig into every corner of your past. We will make sure that by the time this is over, no one in this state will ever believe a word you say. We will ruin you." He had said the words. The threat was out, hanging in the air between them, ugly and final. He expected her to cry, to break, to finally see that she was outmatched and give in. Instead, she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a bitter, broken, but incredibly strong laugh. "Ruin me," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Do you think you have anything left to take from me? You already took my privacy. You took my job. You're trying to take my home. You've turned this entire town against me. What else is there?" She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "You don't get it, do you? I have nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for." She walked to the table, picked up the settlement agreement, and, without reading a single word, tore it in half. Then she tore it again and again, letting the pieces flutter from her fingers onto the floor like confetti at a funeral. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her anger. Liam stood frozen, the pieces of the shredded document at his feet. He had failed. His threats, his money, his power, they were all meaningless to her. He had come here as a Bradshaw, a prince delivering an ultimatum to a peasant. But in this small room, he was the one who felt powerless. She had a conviction he could never buy, a strength he could never break. He saw the star on Lily's wrist again, peeking out from the edge of her blanket. The truth was right there, so small and yet so immense. "Elara, please," he started, a desperate, unplanned plea. "Get out," she repeated, pointing to the door. He looked at her one last time, at the unwavering strength in her sky-blue eyes. Then he turned and walked out into the storm, the door slamming shut behind him. As he walked back to his car, soaked by the cold, driving rain, he felt a terrifying certainty. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning, and he was on the wrong side of the fight. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break over his perfectly constructed life. The news that Elara had torn up the settlement agreement and thrown Liam out of her house hit the Bradshaw mansion like a shockwave. Richard Bradshaw, a man who was accustomed to getting his way through power and intimidation, was incensed. It was not just a refusal. It was an act of defiance. To him, it was a declaration that this slip of a girl, this nobody, believed she could stand against them. "Fine," he had snarled at Liam, his face dark with fury. "She wants a war? We will give her a war she cannot possibly win." And so, the quiet campaign of pressure escalated into a full-blown assault. The first volley was fired by the Bradshaw lawyers. They filed a motion to dismiss Elara's paternity suit, claiming it was frivolous and vexatious. The motion was accompanied by a sworn affidavit from Liam, a document filled with carefully worded denials and outright lies. In it, he painted Elara as an unstable and opportunistic artist who had become infatuated with him, who was now trying to extort money from his family by fabricating a wild and malicious story. The document was leaked to the Harmony Creek Chronicle, the local newspaper that had been owned by a Bradshaw cousin for 50 years. The story ran on the front page under a sensational headline: "Local artist accused of extortion. Plot against Bradshaw heir." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It twisted the narrative, portraying Liam as the victim and Elara as the predatory villain. It included anonymous quotes from concerned townspeople who questioned her character and her motives. "She was always a bit strange, kept to herself," one quote read. "It seems she saw a golden opportunity and took it." Another said, "It's a classic gold digger story. Poor Liam, he's too trusting." The article spread through the town like a virus. It validated the whispers and the gossip, giving them the weight of printed fact. The few people who had been neutral or sympathetic now looked at Elara with suspicion. The tide of public opinion, which had already been against her, now became a tsunami of condemnation. When Elara saw the newspaper, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. She read the lies, the twisted half-truths, the cruel words attributed to the man who was her daughter's father. It felt like being publicly stoned. Every word was a rock thrown at her, designed to wound, to shame, to break her spirit. She wanted to hide, to lock her door and never come out. But then she looked at Lily, who was cooing happily in her playpen, blissfully unaware of the ugly words being printed about her mother. That innocent sound was a call to arms. She couldn't hide. She had to fight. She immediately called Sarah Jenkins, her voice trembling with rage. "Did you see it? Did you see what they're doing?" "I saw it," Sarah's voice was grim but steady. "This is exactly what we expected, Elara. It's a classic smear campaign. They're trying to poison the well before we ever get to court. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to me." Elara cried, pacing her small living room. "They're calling me a liar and an extortionist on the front page. Everyone in this town is going to believe them. Let them," Sarah said firmly. "Their words are just noise. We have something they don't, the truth. And we have a path to proving it. I've already filed our response to their motion. The judge has set a date for a preliminary hearing. It's in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. In those 2 weeks, the pressure intensified. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, served her with a formal eviction notice, citing her failure to pay the exorbitant new rent. She was given 30 days to vacate the property. The walls were closing in, literally. She started looking for another place to live, but every door was shut in her face. Landlords who had vacancies would suddenly tell her the apartment was taken the moment she gave her name. The Bradshaw influence was everywhere, poisoning every potential refuge. Her small savings began to dwindle at an alarming rate. With no income from her art, she was forced to use what little she had for diapers, formula, and food. The fear of not being able to provide for her daughter was a constant, gnawing ache in the pit of her stomach. One afternoon, she was walking home from the grocery store, her meager purchases in a canvas bag, when Amelia Croft's car pulled up beside her. Amelia rolled down the window, her face a perfect cold mask. "You should have taken the money," Amelia said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You could have been gone by now, living comfortably somewhere else. But you chose to be stubborn. Now look at you." Her eyes swept over Elara's worn clothes, her tired face. "Did you really think you could win against us?" "This isn't about winning or losing," Elara said, her chin held high. "It's about my daughter's right to know who her father is." Amelia laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Your daughter? You mean your meal ticket? You are pathetic. You are going to lose everything. And when you do, don't expect any sympathy from this town. You brought this on yourself." She rolled up the window and the car sped away, leaving Elara standing on the sidewalk, her heart pounding with a helpless rage. That night, Elara hit her lowest point. The eviction notice sat on the table, a stark white reminder of her impending homelessness. Her pantry was nearly bare. Lily had a slight fever and was crying fitfully. The weight of the world felt like it was crushing her. She sank to the floor, her back against the kitchen cabinets, and for the first time since the festival, she allowed herself to sob, deep, racking sobs of fear and despair. She felt utterly alone, a tiny boat in a raging, merciless sea. They were going to win. They were going to crush her and toss her aside, and no one would care. But as she sat there, broken and weeping in the dark, she felt a small, warm hand on her cheek. Lily had crawled out of her playpen and had made her way over to her. She looked at her mother with wide, worried eyes, her tiny brow furrowed in concern. She let out a soft coo and patted her mother's wet cheek, as if to say, "It's okay, Mama, I'm here." In that moment, something inside Elara shifted. Looking into her daughter's innocent, trusting face, she felt a surge of strength so powerful, it chased away the despair. This wasn't just her fight. It was their fight, and she would not lose. She would not let them take this precious, beautiful life and label it a lie. She wiped her tears, her sobs subsiding into a fierce, silent resolve. She scooped her daughter into her arms, holding her tight. "You're right, baby girl," she whispered, her voice thick but strong. "You're here, and that's all that matters." She stood up, her back straight. The Bradshaws had thrown everything they had at her. They had taken her job, her home, her reputation, but they hadn't taken her spirit. And they had made one critical mistake. They had shown her just how much she had to fight for. The hearing was in 2 weeks, and she would be ready. In the 2 weeks leading up to the hearing, Liam Bradshaw lived in a self-made prison of guilt and denial. On the surface, he was the picture of confidence. He attended town meetings, posed for photos with Amelia at charity events, and issued confident no comments to the reporters who occasionally ambushed him. He was playing the part his father had assigned him, the wronged man, the victim of a malicious plot, a leader standing firm against scandal. But behind the locked doors of the mansion, he was unraveling. He barely slept. When he did, His dreams were haunted by Elara's blazing eyes and the image of a tiny, perfect star on a baby's wrist. He drank more than he should, the whiskey doing little to numb the gnawing unease in his gut. He saw the front-page story in the Chronicle. He read his own lies, his own cruel words, and felt a profound sense of self-loathing. He had allowed his father's lawyers to twist his cowardly denial into a weapon, and they were using it to bludgeon Elara's reputation into dust. He knew about the eviction notice. He knew her art stall had been shut down. His father kept him informed of every move, speaking of their strategy with a cold, triumphant satisfaction, as if they were winning a corporate takeover instead of systematically destroying a woman's life. Every victory felt like a defeat. Every step forward in their legal strategy felt like a step further into a moral abyss from which he might never return. He found himself driving down the winding country road that led past her cottage. Slowing down as he passed, he would see the lights on, a warm, defiant glow against the darkness, and wonder what was happening inside. Was she scared? Was she crying? Was she looking at their daughter and cursing his name? One evening he saw her through the window. She was sitting in the rocking chair, Lily in her arms, singing a soft lullaby. The scene was so peaceful, so tender, it was like a punch to the gut. He was paying lawyers to call this woman a liar and a monster, while she was at home, gently singing his child to sleep. The hypocrisy was suffocating. He wanted to stop the car, to get out, to pound on her door and confess everything, to say, "I'm sorry, I was a coward, this has gone too far." But he couldn't. The weight of his father's expectations, of Amelia's family, of the entire town's perception of him, was a chain holding him in place. He was trapped in the gilded cage he had helped to build. His relationship with Amelia grew more strained by the day. She refused to discuss the situation, as she called it, but it was a constant, icy presence between them. She was obsessed with maintaining appearances, with planning a wedding that felt more like a business merger than a celebration of love. "We need to decide on the caterer." "Liam," she would say, her voice tight, as if discussing floral arrangements could somehow erase the scandal that was consuming their lives. He looked at her across the dinner table one night, at her perfect hair, her expensive jewelry, her carefully composed expression, and he felt nothing. He realized with a sickening jolt that he was about to marry a woman he didn't love, to preserve a life he was beginning to hate. He was sacrificing his own child, his own integrity, for an illusion. The day before the hearing, his father's lead attorney, a slick, expensive man named Marcus Thorne, came to the mansion to prep him. "The goal tomorrow is simple," Thorne said, pacing the study. "We are there to convince the judge that her petition is baseless and filed in bad faith. We will paint her as an unreliable narrator. I will present your affidavit and highlight the inconsistencies in her story. Your job is to sit there and look like the credible, upstanding citizen you are. And what if the judge doesn't dismiss it?" Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What if he orders the test?" Thorne stopped pacing and gave him a sharp, appraising look. "He won't. We've filed enough motions and created enough doubt to ensure this never sees the inside of a lab. Judge Miller is an old friend of your father's. He understands the importance of protecting a community from disruptions." The implication was clear. The scales of justice were already tipped in their favor. The hearing was just a formality, a piece of theater to legitimize a foregone conclusion. Liam felt a strange mix of relief and disgust. He was going to win. The case would be dismissed. The problem would be erased, just as his father had wanted. He would be free. His life would go back to normal. But as Thorne continued to drone on about legal strategy, Liam's mind drifted. He saw Elara's face, not angry and defiant as she had been in her doorway, but as he remembered her from that night in the snowstorm. Her face was soft in the firelight, her eyes full of a quiet wisdom, her laughter like a melody he had forgotten until now. She had seen him, the real him, beneath the Bradshaw name, and he had repaid her by trying to destroy her. The word free echoed in his mind. He would win the hearing, but he would not be free. He would be more trapped than ever, chained for the rest of his life to a lie, to the knowledge of a daughter he had abandoned, to the ghost of the man he could have been if he had only had the courage to tell the truth. "Liam, are you listening to me?" Thorne's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. Liam looked up, his eyes unfocused. He saw his father's lawyer, his father's desk, his father's world, and for the first time he didn't see power or legacy. He saw prison. Yes, he said, the lie automatic now. I'm listening. But he wasn't. He was listening to a tiny, quiet voice inside him, a voice he had been trying to silence for months. It was the voice of his conscience. And it was telling him that tomorrow, in that courtroom, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. A mistake that no amount of money or power could ever fix. The Harmony Creek Courthouse was an old, imposing brick building that stood in the center of the town square, right across from where the festival stage had been. On the morning of the hearing, the air was crisp and cool, but inside the courtroom the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room was small, with worn wooden pews and high, dusty windows. It wasn't officially open to the public, but the pews were filled with the town's most influential figures, town council members, business owners and Amelia's parents, the Crofts, who sat in the front row with stony expressions. It was a silent jury, there to witness the Bradshaws put this scandal to rest. Elara sat at a small table with her lawyer, Sarah Jenkins. She wore a simple dark blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked composed, her hands resting calmly in her lap, but inside her heart was a frantic drum. She clutched a small, worn photograph in her pocket, a picture of Lily, her tiny face smiling at the camera. It was a talisman, a reminder of why she was here, of who she was fighting for. Across the aisle, Liam sat at another table with his father and their attorney, Marcus Thorne. Liam looked pale and drawn, his expensive suit hanging on him as if it were a size too big. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, refusing to look in her direction. The hearing began. Judge Miller, a man with a shock of white hair and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl, entered and took his seat. Marcus Thorne stood up, his voice smooth and confident as he addressed the court. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today because of a baseless and malicious claim filed by Ms. Elara Vance. This is not a legitimate paternity dispute. It is a calculated attempt to harass and extort money from one of this town's most respected families." For the next 20 minutes, Thorne proceeded to systematically dismantle Elara's character. He presented Liam's affidavit, quoting passages that painted Elara as obsessive and unstable. He brought up the fact that she had been served an eviction notice, framing it not as retaliation, but as the action of a landlord dealing with a delinquent tenant. He even managed to twist her lack of steady income into a motive, suggesting she had concocted this story out of financial desperation. Elara sat listening to the cascade of lies, a cold numbness spreading through her. It was worse than she had imagined. He was making her sound like a villain in a cheap novel. With every word, she could feel the silent jury in the pews hardening against her. She risked a glance at Liam. He was still staring straight ahead, his face a blank, unreadable mask. He looked like a stranger, a man she had never known. Finally, Thorne finished his presentation with a flourish. "Therefore, Your Honor, we ask that you dismiss this frivolous petition and award Mr. Bradshaw legal fees for having to defend himself against these outrageous claims." He sat down, a smug, satisfied look on his face. The room was silent. Elara's heart sank. It was over. He had won. Then Sarah Jenkins stood up. Her voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the heavy silence. "Your Honor," she said, "what Mr. Thorne has just presented is a very compelling work of fiction. But we are not here to discuss fiction. We are here to discuss a simple biological fact that Mr. Bradshaw is terrified of confronting." She walked toward the judge's bench, holding a single small envelope. "Mr. Thorne speaks of harassment and extortion. I speak of a mother's right to have her child's father legally recognized. He speaks of my client's character. I would like to speak about a child's identity." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Mr. Bradshaw claims he has no connection to my client's child. He claims it's a coincidence that my client became pregnant shortly after their admitted intimacy. He claims it is a coincidence that he tried to pay her to get rid of it, as he so callously put it." A small gasp rippled through the courtroom at this new piece of information. Liam flinched, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "But there is one coincidence that is harder to dismiss. It is a genetic marker, a birthmark that has been passed down through the Bradshaw family for generations, a small star-shaped mark on the wrist. She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It was a clear, close-up shot of Lily's tiny wrist, the strawberry-colored star perfectly visible. She placed it on the judge's bench. "My client's daughter, Lily, has this exact mark, Your Honor," Sarah said. "Is that also coincidence? Or is it the truth staring Mr. Bradshaw in the face? A truth he has gone to extraordinary lengths to deny." The air in the courtroom was electric. All eyes were on the photograph, then on Liam. His carefully constructed composure was beginning to crack. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Sarah turned, her gaze sweeping over the silent crowd before landing directly on Liam. "We are not asking for money, Your Honor. We are not asking for sympathy. We are asking for a simple scientific test, a DNA test that will prove once and for all what Mr. Bradshaw already knows in his heart." She looked directly at Liam, her voice ringing with challenge. "If you are so certain this child is not yours, Mr. Bradshaw, then what are you so afraid of? Why not agree to the test and put an end to this right now? Unless, of course, you already know what the results will be." The silence that followed was absolute. Every single person in the room was looking at Liam, waiting for his response. His father shot him a look that was pure ice, a silent command to stay strong, to stay silent. His lawyer, Thorne, was about to stand up and object, but something inside Liam broke. He saw it all in a flash. Elara's face in the town square, the pieces of the torn settlement on her floor, her silhouette in the window singing his daughter to sleep. He saw the cold, calculating look in his father's eyes. He saw Amelia, who was staring at him with a look of pure panic. He saw his whole life, a beautiful, polished lie about to be cemented in place by this courtroom, and he couldn't do it. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Liam, sit down," his father hissed from beside him. Thorne grabbed his arm. "Mr. Bradshaw, what are you doing?" But Liam shook him off. He looked past his father, past his lawyer, past the shocked faces in the pews. His eyes found Elara's. For the first time since this nightmare began, he truly looked at her. He saw the pain, the exhaustion, and the incredible, unbreakable strength. And then he looked at the judge, his voice. When he spoke was hoarse, cracked, but it filled the courtroom. "She's right," he said. The words coming out in a rush of air he felt he'd been holding in for months. "I'm the one who's been lying." A collective gasp went through the room. His father's face turned ashen. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. Liam's gaze returned to Elara, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "The baby, Lily, she's mine." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. The single stunning admission, "she's mine," shattered the tense silence like a hammer striking glass. Reporters who had been lurking in the hallway, alerted by someone inside, surged toward the doors. Amelia Croft let out a small, strangled cry and stumbled from the front row, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, her mother rushing after her. Richard Bradshaw shot to his feet, his face a thunderous shade of red, his mouth opening and closing like a man who had been robbed of air. "Liam, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. But Liam didn't hear him. He didn't hear the shouts of the reporters, the frantic whispers, or the gavel that Judge Miller was now banging in a futile attempt to restore order. His entire world had narrowed to a single point: Elara. She was still sitting at her table, her expression one of utter, profound shock. Her lips were slightly parted, her sky-blue eyes wide as she stared at him. It was not the look of a victor. It was the look of someone who had braced for a final, brutal blow and had instead been met with an impossible surrender. "Your Honor, my client is clearly under duress," Marcus Thorne shouted, trying to salvage the situation. "I request a recess to confer with my client." "I'm not under duress," Liam said, his voice stronger now, clearer. He felt as if a tremendous, crushing weight had been lifted from his chest. The lie had been a cancer, and speaking the truth, no matter how catastrophic the consequences, was the first, painful step of cutting it out. He took a step away from his father, away from his lawyer, a physical separation from the world of lies he had inhabited. He walked slowly, deliberately into the open space in the center of the courtroom, his eyes never leaving Elara's. "I lied," he said, speaking not to the judge, but to her, to the entire room. I lied from the very beginning. At the festival, in my affidavit, every word of it was a lie. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. I was a coward. I was scared. I was so terrified of what my father would say, of what it would do to my engagement, to my reputation, that I did the unthinkable. I denied my own daughter. He finally looked down, unable to bear the weight of Elara's stunned gaze. And I didn't just deny her, he continued, his voice thick with a shame that was raw and real. I tried to destroy her mother. I let my father and my lawyers attack your character, threaten your home, and take away your livelihood. Everything that has happened to you, it was my fault. And I am so sorry. The apology hung in the air, simple, stark, and utterly devastating. It was more than an admission of paternity. It was a confession of monstrous behavior. Richard Bradshaw strode forward and grabbed his son's arm, his fingers digging in like talons. "You have lost your mind," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper for Liam's ears only. "You are destroying this family. You are destroying yourself." Liam looked at his father, and for the first time in his life he felt no fear, only a deep, profound pity. "No, Father," he said quietly. "I'm finally trying to save myself." He gently pulled his arm free from his father's grasp. The act was a quiet rebellion, but it was the most significant of his life. He was no longer his father's son in that moment. He was his own man, and he was Lily's father. Judge Miller, having finally restored a semblance of order, looked down from his bench, his expression a mixture of shock and stern disapproval. "Mr. Bradshaw, given your testimony, this court has no choice. I am dismissing your lawyer's motion, and I am ordering an immediate DNA test to formalize the record." "That won't be necessary, Your Honor," Liam said, his voice steady. "I don't need a test to tell me what I already know. I am her father. I will sign any document, a voluntary declaration of paternity, whatever is required. I will take full financial responsibility." Elara finally found her voice. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. Sarah Jenkins put a supportive hand on her arm. "It's not about financial responsibility," Elara said, her voice shaking but clear. "It was never about the money. It was about her right to have her name, to have a father." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of a complex, overwhelming mix of relief and anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The damage? Can't just stand here and say you're sorry and expect everything to be fixed." "I know," Liam said, his own voice cracking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I am begging you, please don't let my mistakes punish her. Let me try. Let me try to be a father to her." The rawness of his plea silenced the remaining whispers in the room. This was no longer a legal battle. It was a human tragedy, laid bare for all to see. Richard Bradshaw turned on his heel and strode out of the courtroom without another word, his back rigid with fury. He had lost control. He had lost his son. The empire of lies had crumbled. Liam watched him go, a pang of old, familiar pain twisting in his gut. But he didn't call after him. He turned back to Elara, his expression stripped of all pretense, all arrogance. He was just a man, broken and ashamed, asking for a chance he knew he hadn't earned. "This changes nothing for now," Elara said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "You have a long way to go to prove you mean any of this." "I know," he whispered. "Whatever it takes. I'll do it." The hearing was adjourned. The spell was broken. As Elara and Sarah walked out of the courtroom, they were met with a barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions. But the tone had changed. Elara was no longer the villain. She was the woman who had fought for the truth and won. She walked through the crowd, her head held high, not stopping to speak to anyone. She had done what she came to do. She had given her daughter a name. Liam followed a few moments later, alone. The reporters swarmed him, but he simply shook his head, his eyes searching the crowd until he saw her, a small, solitary figure walking away from the courthouse, toward a future that was now irrevocably tied to his. He had won his freedom from his father's control, but he had chained himself to a new, much heavier responsibility. The path forward was not a clear, sunlit road. It was a steep, treacherous climb out of a deep, dark hole he had dug for himself. And he knew he would have to make that climb alone. The fallout from Liam's courtroom confession was immediate and spectacular. By noon, the story was the lead item on every local news broadcast and was spreading like wildfire through statewide social media circles. The Harmony Creek Chronicle, in a dizzying reversal, ran a special afternoon edition with a headline that screamed, "Bradshaw admits paternity. In shocking courtroom confession, I lied." The town was in an uproar. The neat, tidy narrative they had been fed had been blown to pieces. Liam Bradshaw, their golden boy, was a liar, and Elara Vance, the woman they had scorned and ostracized, was a mother who had been telling the truth all along. The tide of public opinion, always a fickle and powerful thing, began to turn with a vengeance. The Croft family formally and very publicly announced that the engagement between Amelia and Liam was broken. Their statement was cold and clinical, citing irreconcilable differences and a betrayal of trust. Behind the scenes, Amelia's father was systematically dismantling the business partnerships he had with the Bradshaw Corporation, a move that would cost Richard Bradshaw millions. The perfect alliance was in ruins. Liam returned to the Bradshaw mansion to find his father waiting for him in the study. The room was dark, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Richard was not yelling. His rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, a glacial, unforgiving calm. "You have, in a single morning, undone a century of work," Richard said, his voice flat. "You have disgraced our name, alienated our partners, and made a mockery of this family. All for a woman and a child that mean nothing." "She means something to me," Liam said quietly, the words feeling both strange and true on his tongue. "Lily is my daughter." Richard laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "She is a consequence, a mistake, and you have just elevated that mistake to the level of a catastrophe." He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, gesturing to the town below. "They are laughing at us, Liam. For the first time, this town is not looking at us with respect. They are looking at us with contempt, and that is a stain you can never wash away." He turned back, his eyes like chips of ice. "You have made your choice. You chose them over us, so from this moment on, you're no longer a part of this family's business. Your accounts will be frozen. Your access to the company is revoked. You are cut off. You wanted to be your own man. Fine. Let's see how long you last without the Bradshaw name to protect you." The words were a brutal, surgical strike, designed to sever him completely. For his entire life, Liam had been defined by his name, his inheritance, his future role as the head of the Bradshaw empire. To have it all stripped away in an instant should have been terrifying. But instead, as his father's cold pronouncement settled over him, Liam felt an unexpected, dizzying sense of lightness. The chains were finally broken. "Fine," he said, the single word holding a universe of defiance. He turned and walked out of the study, out of the grand, silent mansion that had been his gilded cage, and did not look back. He got into his car and drove away, with no destination in mind, only the overwhelming feeling that his life had just ended and begun at the very same time. Meanwhile, Elara's world was also turning upside down, but in a completely different way. After returning from the courthouse, she had locked her door, turned off her phone, and simply held her daughter. She felt exhausted, emotionally scoured, as if she had just survived a hurricane. But the world would not leave her alone. That afternoon, a bouquet of flowers arrived from an anonymous well-wisher. Then another. Mrs. Gable came by, not with a casserole, but with a fierce, proud hug. "Told you the truth finds a way," she'd rasped, patting Elara's back. The market manager called, his voice full of awkward apology, telling her that her stall was, of course, welcome back any time. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, left a flustered message on her answering machine, rescinding the eviction notice and apologizing for the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the rent. The invisible walls that had been closing in on her were crumbling one by one. The townspeople who had shunned her now offered hesitant smiles and nods on the street. It wasn't forgiveness she sought from them, and she knew their sudden change of heart was shallow, but the absence of their hostility was a relief. She could breathe again. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived from Sarah Jenkins' office. Inside was the first of many child support checks, along with a legally binding voluntary declaration of paternity, signed by Liam. It was real. It was official. Lily Vance now had a legal father, and his name was Liam Bradshaw. Staring at the document, Elara felt the last of the tension drain from her shoulders. The war was officially over, but what came next? She had won. She had gotten the truth, the name, the financial security for her daughter. But her heart was a complicated knot of emotions. Liam's confession had been a stunning act of self-destruction, and, strangely, of courage. The man who had stood up in that courtroom was not the same arrogant coward who had sneered at her in the town square. He had tried to call her several times, but she hadn't answered. She wasn't ready. She didn't know what to say to him. What could she say? Thank you for finally telling the truth after you tried to ruin my life? One cool evening, about a week after the hearing, she was sitting on her porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, when a car she didn't recognize, a modest, used sedan, not his usual luxury vehicle, pulled up. Liam got out. He looked different. He was dressed in simple jeans and a worn sweater. The confident, polished swagger was gone. He looked tired, uncertain, and profoundly alone. He walked up the path and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, not daring to come any closer. "I know you probably don't want to see me," he said, his voice quiet. I heard you got your stall back at the market, and that the eviction was stopped. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "We're fine," she said, her tone guarded. "No thanks to you." He winced but nodded. "I know. I deserve that." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "My father?" He cut me off. "The company, the money, everything. I'm on my own now." He wasn't telling her this to gain sympathy. He was just stating a fact. "What will you do?" she asked, a flicker of unwanted curiosity stirring within her. He shrugged, a gesture of profound uncertainty. "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I have no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow." He finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers in the twilight. They were filled with a deep, aching sadness. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Elara, but I need to see her. Just for a minute, please." His plea was stripped of all power, all entitlement. It was just the raw, desperate request of a father wanting to see his child. She thought of the man who had ordered her to get rid of it. She thought of the man who had threatened to ruin her. But she also thought of the man who had sacrificed his entire world to tell the truth. She stood up and went inside, leaving the door open. A moment later, she returned with Lily in her arms. The baby was awake, her wide, curious eyes fixing on the stranger at the bottom of the steps. Elara walked down the steps and stood before him. She didn't hand the baby to him. She just held her, allowing him to look. Tears welled in Liam's eyes as he gazed at his daughter's face. He reached out a trembling hand not to touch her, but just to hover in the space near her, as if he were afraid he might break her. "She's so beautiful," he whispered, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "She looks like you." "She has your eyes," Elara said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "And your mark." He finally let his fingers gently brush against the tiny star on Lily's wrist. At his touch, Lily didn't cry or pull away. Instead, she gurgled and reached out, her tiny, chubby hand wrapping around his thumb with a surprising strength. In that moment, Liam Bradshaw, the man who had lost everything, felt a connection so powerful, so profound that it filled the vast, empty space inside him. It wasn't a legacy of money or power. It was a legacy of blood, of love, of a truth that could no longer be denied. And he knew, standing there in the twilight with his daughter's hand in his, that his new life, the real one, had just begun. The weeks that followed settled into a strange and fragile new reality. Liam did not disappear. True to his word, he stayed, but he kept his distance, respecting the invisible boundary Elara had drawn around herself and Lily. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply was there. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment above the old hardware store on Main Street, a place so modest and unassuming that it caused a fresh wave of gossip throughout the town. The Golden Prince of Harmony Creek was now living like an ordinary man. He sold his luxury car and bought a reliable second-hand truck. He was seen in the grocery store, looking lost in the produce aisle and at the diner, eating alone at the counter. His fall from grace was a public spectacle, but he bore it with a quiet humility that slowly began to chip away at the town's contempt, replacing it with a grudging sort of respect. He had made a terrible mistake, but he wasn't running from it. He was living with the consequences, right there in the open for everyone to see. He began to visit the cottage, but his visits were brief and tentative. He would call first, his voice always hesitant on the phone. "Is it a good time for me to stop by for a few minutes?" "I won't stay long." Elara, against her own better judgment, always said yes. She told herself it was for Lily. It was important for her daughter to know her father, to see his face, to hear his voice. But a small, honest part of her knew it was for her, too. She was drawn to this new version of Liam, this humbled, broken man who was so profoundly different from the arrogant heir she had known. When he came, he would sit on the floor, his long legs folded awkwardly, and play with Lily. He learned her favorite toys, the funny sound that always made her giggle, the soft spot behind her ear she liked to have tickled. He was clumsy and unsure of himself, a man learning the foreign language of fatherhood word by word. But his efforts were sincere. His eyes, when he looked at his daughter, were filled with a raw, undisguised adoration that was both heartbreaking and beautiful to watch. Elara would observe them from a distance, from the kitchen doorway or the rocking chair, her arms crossed, her heart a confusing battlefield of old wounds and new, tentative feelings. She couldn't forget the pain he had caused. The memory of his cruelty was a scar that still ached, but she also couldn't deny the change she was witnessing. One afternoon, he arrived looking more tired than usual, with grease stains on his jeans and his hands calloused and rough. "What have you been doing?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice. "I got a job," he said, a faint, weary smile on his face. "Working for Mr. Henderson's construction crew. We're repairing the old bridge down by the river." Elara was stunned. Liam Bradshaw, the man who had been groomed to run a multi-million-dollar corporation, was now doing manual labor. The irony was not lost on her. He was working for the very man he had once pressured to evict her. "Why?" she asked, the question hanging between them. "I have to," he said simply. "I have child support to pay, and I need to work. I need to do something real, something with my hands. I've been living in my father's world for so long, I don't even know who I am without it. Maybe I can find out by building something instead of just owning it." His words struck a chord deep inside her. He was not just trying to be a father. He was trying to rebuild himself from the ground up. As autumn began to paint the hills in shades of rust and gold once more, the rhythm of their lives continued. Liam's visits grew longer. Sometimes he would stay for dinner. They would eat at the small kitchen table, the three of them, and for brief, fleeting moments it felt almost normal. Almost like a family they talked, not about the past. That was still a minefield of unspoken pain, but about the present. About Lily's first steps, about the book he was reading, about a new shade of blue Elara had mixed for a painting. They were like two strangers getting to know each other for the first time, which, in a way, they were. But the past was always there, a shadow in the corner of the room. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Elara found him standing in front of one of her paintings. It was the one she had painted for the winter gala, the one he had bought, and that she had later found discarded in a storage room at the Bradshaw building and taken back. A snow-covered landscape, with a single small cottage glowing with warm light. "I was so lost back then," he said quietly, his back to her. "So lonely. I came to this cottage and, for a little while, I felt seen. I felt a peace I'd never known." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a deep, haunting regret. "And then I got scared. I ran right back to the safety of my gilded cage. And I threw away the only real thing I had ever found." His confession was so raw, so honest, it left her breathless. All the anger she had been holding on to, all the resentment began to feel heavy and pointless. "Why, Liam?" she whispered, the question she had needed to ask for so long. "After that night, why did you just disappear? Why did you pretend I didn't exist?" He looked down, his voice thick with shame. "Because I was a coward," he said. "Because in the light of day, you represented everything my world was taught to dismiss. You weren't from the right family. You didn't have money. You didn't fit into the plan. My father, he would have seen you as a weakness. And I was too weak to stand up to him. So I did the easy thing. The cruel thing, I erased you." He finally looked at her, his eyes glistening. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. And I have been paying for it every single day since." The wall around Elara's heart, the one she had so carefully constructed brick by brick, began to crumble. She saw him then, not as the monster who had hurt her, but as a man who had been just as trapped by his father's expectations as she had been by his cruelty. They were both survivors of Richard Bradshaw's world. She didn't offer him forgiveness. It wasn't that simple. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a year. Understanding. And with that understanding came the first tentative possibility of healing. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a road she had to walk alone. Liam's confession did not magically erase the past, but it cleared the air between them. The heavy unspoken questions had finally been answered, and in the space they left behind, something new and fragile began to grow. The foundation of their interaction shifted from the cautious dance of a victim and her penitent tormentor to something more akin to a tentative friendship. He became a constant, steady presence in their lives. He was there for Lily's first birthday, sitting on the floor of the small cottage surrounded by a few of Elara's new friends and a very proud Mrs. Gable. He didn't come bearing expensive gifts, but a small hand-carved wooden bird that he had whittled himself during his lunch breaks at the construction site. As Lily clutched the simple toy, her face lit up with a joyful grin. Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest that no diamond bracelet could have ever inspired. He was there when Lily got her first real cold, taking turns with Elara rocking the feverish, crying baby through a long, sleepless night. The quiet pre-dawn hours as they sat exhausted in the dim light of the kitchen, sharing a pot of coffee, Elara found herself looking at him, really looking at him. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the genuine worry etched on his face. This was not a performance. This was fatherhood in all its messy, unglamorous reality. And he wasn't running from it. He was sitting right there in the middle of it with her. The town continued to watch them, their story becoming a kind of living folklore in Harmony Creek. They were seen together at the park, pushing Lily on the swings. They were seen at the diner sharing a plate of fries. The gossip slowly transformed from scandal to a quieter, more curious speculation. Were they getting back together? Elara didn't know the answer to that herself. Her heart was a landscape of contradictions. She was fiercely protective of her independence, proud of the life she had managed to build and defend on her own. The thought of letting Liam fully into her life, of trusting him with her heart again, was terrifying. The wound he had inflicted was deep, and she was afraid that the scar tissue was still too thin, that it could be torn open again. But she also couldn't deny the connection that was reforming between them, a connection that was quieter, deeper, and more honest than the first time. This new Liam was not the charming prince from the fairy tale. He was a man humbled by his mistakes, a man who was learning the value of hard work and quiet integrity. And she found herself admiring that man more than she had ever admired the heir to the Bradshaw fortune. One crisp autumn afternoon, he came to the cottage after a long day of work, his clothes dusty and his face streaked with dirt. "My father is selling the mansion," he said, his voice flat as he leaned against the porch railing. "He's moving to the city. He says Harmony Creek is tainted now." "I'm sorry," Elara said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. She felt a pang of sadness for the broken relationship between the two men, for a family legacy that had been shattered by pride and fear. "Don't be," Liam said, shaking his head. "It's for the best. That house was never a home. It was a museum full of ghosts and expectations." He looked out at the rolling hills, the trees ablaze with color. "He offered me a final deal. He said he would give me a portion of my inheritance, a severance package, as he called it, if I would legally change my name and never associate myself with the Bradshaw business again." "Are you going to take it?" she asked, holding her breath. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes clear and steady. "No," he said. "I don't want his money. And I'm not changing my name. It's my name, and it's Lily's name. I spent my whole life being ashamed of failing to live up to it, and then I became ashamed of what it represented. But it's just a name. It's the man who carries it that matters. I'm going to make it mean something good again. For her." His words were a quiet declaration of independence, a final severing of the ties that had bound him to a life of hollow obligation. In that moment, Elara saw him not as a fallen prince, but as a king who was finally building his own kingdom. A kingdom founded not on wealth, but on character. Later that week, he came to her with a proposal. "The old Miller farm at the edge of town is for sale," he said, his voice full of a nervous excitement she hadn't heard before. "It's run down, the barn is falling apart, but the land is beautiful. It has a stream and a big old oak tree." He spread a crumpled drawing out on her kitchen table. It was a rough amateur sketch of a house, a barn, and a small art studio, with a large north-facing window. "I've been saving every penny I've made," he said, his words tumbling out. "It's not much, but with a loan, I think I can afford the down payment. I want to fix it up. I want to build a real home, Elara. A place with a garden and a swing set. Place for Lily to grow up. A place where she can run and be free." He finally looked at her, his hope and his fear laid bare in his eyes. "And I want you to be there. I want us to be a family. I know I have no right to ask. I know I broke your trust, but I love you. I think I have from the very beginning. I was just too much of a coward to see it. And I will spend the rest of my life earning back your trust if you'll let me." Elara stared at the drawing, at the little house, the barn, the studio that he had drawn just for her. Her heart was pounding. This was it. The door she had been so afraid to open. He was standing on the other side, not demanding to be let in, but asking for permission to help her build a new one. She thought of the lonely, isolated life she had led before. She thought of the fear and the shame she had endured. And she thought of the quiet, steady man standing before her now. A man who had lost a kingdom but had found his soul. Tears welled in her eyes. But for the first time in a very long time, they were not tears of sorrow or of anger. They were tears of hope. "The studio needs another window," she said softly, her finger tracing the lines of his drawing. To catch the morning light, a slow, brilliant smile spread across Liam's face. A smile so full of relief and joy that it lit up the entire room. "Whatever you want," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll build you whatever you want." He reached across the table and took her hand. His hand was no longer the soft, manicured hand of a businessman. It was the rough, calloused hand of a worker, a builder. It was the hand of a man who was ready to create a future, not just inherit one. And as her fingers intertwined with his, Elara knew, with a quiet certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was finally home. The story of Liam and Elara did not end with a dramatic wedding or a fairy tale promise. Instead, it unfolded quietly, day by day, in the rhythm of ordinary life. Their future wasn't built on grand gestures, but on small, steady acts of love and labor. They bought the old Miller farm, its fields overgrown and its buildings weathered by time. And they began the slow, arduous process of bringing it back to life. Liam, using the skills he had learned on the construction crew, worked from sunrise to sunset. He repaired the leaky roof of the old farmhouse, replaced the rotting porch steps, and cleared the land with his own 2 hands. Elara, with Lily strapped to her back or playing in a patch of sunlight on the grass, worked alongside him. She painted the walls, planted a sprawling vegetable garden, and turned the dilapidated old milk shed into a bright, airy art studio, complete with 2 large windows to catch both the morning and the northern light. The town of Harmony Creek, which had once been the stage for their public humiliation, now became the quiet backdrop to their redemption. People saw them at the hardware store, their clothes splattered with paint, arguing playfully over the right shade of blue for the front door. They saw them at the farmer's market, not just selling Elara's art, but buying fresh produce. Their daughter perched on Liam's shoulders, her happy shrieks echoing through the square. They became a part of the town's fabric, not as the disgraced heir and the scorned artist, but simply as a family. Their story was a quiet lesson for Harmony Creek, a reminder that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, and that the most beautiful things were often built from the pieces of what was broken. Mrs. Gable would visit the farm on Sunday afternoons, bringing her famous apple pie and sitting on the newly built porch, watching Lily chase butterflies in the yard. "Never thought I'd see a Bradshaw with dirt under his fingernails and a genuine smile on his face," she'd say to Elara with a satisfied nod. Turns out losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to that boy. One warm summer evening, Nearly 2 years after the hearing, the three of them were sitting on a blanket under the great oak tree that stood in the middle of their pasture. The farmhouse behind them was no longer a wreck, but a warm, inviting home, with flower boxes overflowing with color, and a swing set Liam had built from the wood of a fallen tree. Lily, now a talkative toddler with her father's stormy gray eyes and her mother's artistic spirit, was chasing fireflies, her laughter like tiny bells in the twilight. Liam lay on his back, his head in Elara's lap. She ran her fingers through his hair, a comfortable, familiar gesture. He looked up at her, his face content in the soft, fading light. "Do you remember the first time I came to your cottage?" he asked quietly. "Of course," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You were the rich, charming man from the big house on the hill. And I was the loneliest man in the world," he said, his voice serious. "I had everything and I had nothing. I thought power and money were what made a man strong. I was so wrong." He reached up and took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You and Lily, you taught me what strength really is. It's not about never falling. It's about getting back up. It's about telling the truth even when it costs you everything." He sat up, his expression earnest. "I know our beginning was a nightmare, Elara. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fully undo. But I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be the man that you and our daughter deserve." He reached into his pocket and pulled out, not a diamond ring in a velvet box, but a simple, delicate silver locket. He opened it. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, perfect engraving of a star. On the other was a space for a picture. "This isn't a plea for you to forget," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a promise that I never will. A promise that our family's mark will now be a symbol of truth, not of a lie." Tears streamed down Elara's face as she looked from the locket to the man beside her. This was not the boy who had run from a snowstorm. This was a man who had walked through a fire and come out on the other side, stronger and truer. The anger and the pain she had held on to for so long had finally, completely dissolved, washed away by the steady, quiet tide of his love and his actions. She leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that held none of the searching loneliness of their first, but all of the deep, quiet certainty of their future. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. It wasn't an answer to a question he had asked, but to the one that had lingered between them for years. Yes, she forgave him. Yes, she trusted him. Yes, this was their home. Just then, Lily came running toward them, her small hands cupped together. "Look," she cried, her eyes wide with wonder. She opened her hands to reveal a single blinking firefly. The tiny light pulsed in the growing darkness, a small but brilliant beacon. Liam wrapped his arm around Elara, pulling her and their daughter into a hug. The three of them sat together under the vast, star-dusted sky, a small family forged not in perfection, but in the messy, beautiful, and redemptive power of truth. The journey had been a painful one, but it had led them here, to a life that was more real and more precious than anything they could have ever inherited. The past was a part of their story, but it no longer defined them. The future, like the field of fireflies before them, was wide open and glowing with a soft, steady light. The lesson of this story is clear and timeless. Truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always find its way to the light. Pride and fear can build empires, but only humility and love can build a home. Elara's courage shows that one person's integrity can be a force powerful enough to topple a dynasty of lies. Liam's journey proves that true strength is found not in denying our mistakes, but in the difficult, daily work of atoning for them. And through Lily, the innocent child with a star on her wrist, we are reminded that every life is a legacy, and that the most profound inheritance we can give our children is not a name or a fortune, but a truth they can build their lives upon.